Chapter 5 of 8 Pillars of Prosperity by James Allen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Fourth pillar, System. System is the principle of order by which confusion is rendered impossible. In the natural and universal order, everything is in its place, so that the vast universe runs more perfectly than the most perfect machine. Disorder in space would mean the destruction of the universe, and disorder in a man's affairs destroys his work and his prosperity. All complex organizations are built up by system. No business or society can develop into large dimensions apart from system, and this principle is preeminently the instrument of the merchant, the businessman, and the organizer of institutions. There are many departments in which a disorderly man may succeed, although attention to order would increase his success. But he will not succeed in business unless he can place the business entirely in the hands of a systematic manager, who will thereby remedy his own defect. All large business concerns have been evolved along definitely drawn systematic lines, any violation of which would be disastrous to the efficiency and welfare of the business. Complex business or other organizations are built up like complex bodies in nature by scrupulous attention to details. The disorderly man thinks he can be careless about everything but the main end, but by ignoring the means he frustrates the end. By the disarrangement of details, organisms perish, and by the careless neglect of details, the growth of any work or concern is prevented. Disorderly people waste an enormous amount of time and energy. The time frittered away in hunting for things is sufficient, were it conserved by order, to enable them to achieve any success. For slovenly people never have a place for anything and have to hunt, frequently for a long time, for any article which they require. In the irritation, bad humor, and chagrin which this daily hunting for things brings about, as much energy is dissipated as would be required to build up a big business or scale the highest heights of achievement in any direction. Orderly people conserve both their time and energy. They never lose anything and therefore never have to find anything. Everything is in its place, and the hand can be at once placed upon it, though it be in the dark. They can well afford to be cool and deliberate, and so use their mental energies in something more profitable than irritation, bad temper, and accusing others for their own lack of order. There is a kind of genius in system which can perform apparent wonders with ease. A systematic man can get through so great a quantity of work in such a short time, and with such freedom from exhaustion as to appear almost miraculous. He scales the heights of success while his slovenly competitor is wallowing hopelessly in the bogs of confusion. His strict observance of the law of order enables him to reach his ends swiftly and smoothly, without friction or loss of time. The demands of system in all departments of the business world are as rigid and exacting as the holy vows of a saint, and cannot be violated in the smallest particular, but at the risk of one's financial prospects. In the financial world, the law of order is an iron necessity, and he who faultlessly observes it saves time, temper, and money. Every enduring achievement in human society rests upon a basis of system. So true is this, that were system withdrawn, progress would cease. Think, for instance, of the vast achievements of literature, the works of great classic authors and of great geniuses, the great poems, the innumerable prose works, the monumental histories, the soul-stirring orations. Think also of the social intercourse of human society, of its religions, its legal statutes, and its vast fund of book knowledge. Think of all these wonderful resources and achievements of language, and then reflect that they all depend for their origin, growth, and continuance on the systematic arrangement of 26 letters, an arrangement having inexhaustible and illimitable results by the fact of its rigid limitation within certain fixed rules. Again, all the wonderful achievements of mathematics have come from the systematic arrangement of 10 figures, while the most complex piece of machinery, with its thousands of parts working together smoothly and almost noiselessly to the achievement of the end for which it was designed, was brought forth by the systematic observance of a few mechanical laws. Here then we see how system simplifies that which is complex, how it makes easy that which was difficult, how it relates an infinite variety of details to the one central law of order, and so enables them to be dealt with and accounted for with perfect regularity and with an entire absence of confusion. The scientist names and classifies the myriad details of the universe, from the microscopic rotifer to the telescopic star, by his observance of the principle of system, so that out of many millions of objects, reference can be made to any one object in, at most, a few minutes. It is this faculty of speedy reference and swift dispatch which is of such overwhelming importance in every department of knowledge and industry, and the amount of time and labor thus saved to humanity is so vast as to be incomputable. We speak of religious, political, and business systems, of systems of thought, education, travel, government, and so on, indicating that all things in human society are welded together by the adhesive qualities of order. System is, indeed, one of the great fundamental principles in progress, and in the binding together in one complete whole of the world's millions of human beings, while they are at the same time each striving for a place, and are competing with one another in opposing aims and interests. We see here how system is allied with greatness, for the many separate units whose minds are untrained to the discipline of system are kept in their place by the organizing power of the comparatively few who perceive the urgent, the unescapable necessity for the establishment of fixed and inviolable rules, whether in business, law, religion, science, or politics. In fact, in every sphere of human activity, for immediately two human beings meet together, they need some common ground of understanding for the avoidance of confusion. In a word, some system to regulate their actions. Life is too short for confusion, and knowledge grows and progress proceeds along avenues of system which prevent retardation and retrogression, so that he who systemizes his knowledge or business simplifies and enhances it for his successor, enabling him to begin with a free mind where he left off. Every large business has its system, which renders its vast machinery workable, enabling it to run like a well-balanced and well-oiled machine. A remarkable businessman, a friend of mine, once told me that he could leave his huge business for 12 months, and it would run on without a hitch till his return. And he does occasionally leave it for several months, while traveling, and on his return every man, boy, and girl, every tool, book, and machine, every detail, down to the smallest, is in its place, doing its work as when he left, and no trouble, no difficulty, no confusion has arisen. There can be no marked success apart from a love of regularity and discipline, and the avoidance of friction, along with the restfulness and efficiency of mind which spring from such regularity. People who abhor discipline, whose minds are ungoverned and anarchic, and who are careless and irregular in their thinking, their habits, and the management of their affairs, cannot be highly successful and prosperous, and they fill their lives with numerous worries, troubles, difficulties, and petty annoyances, all of which would disappear under a proper regulation of their lives. An unsystematic mind is an untrained mind, and it can no more cope with well-disciplined minds in the race of life than an untrained athlete can successfully compete with a carefully trained competitor in athletic races. The ill-disciplined mind that thinks everything will do rapidly falls behind the well-disciplined minds who are convinced that only the best will do in the strenuous race for the prizes of life, whether they be material, mental, or moral prizes. The man who, when he comes to do his work, is unable to find his tools, or to balance his figures, or to find the key of his desk, or the key to his thoughts, will be struggling in his self-made toils, while his methodical neighbor will be freely and joyfully scaling the invigorating heights of successful achievement. The businessman whose method is slovenly or cumbersome, or behind the most recent developments of skilled minds, should only blame himself if his prospects are decadent, and should wake up to the necessity for more highly specialized and effective methods in his concern. He should seize upon everything, every invention and idea that will enable him to economize time and labor, and aid him in thoroughness, deliberation, and dispatch. System is the law by which everything, every organism, business, character, nation, empire is built, by adding cell to cell, department to department, thought to thought, law to law, and colony to colony. In orderly sequence and classification, all things, concerns, and institutions grow in magnitude and evolve to completeness. The man who is continually improving his methods is gaining in building power. It therefore behooves the businessman to be resourceful and inventive in the improvement of his methods, for the builders, whether of cathedrals or characters, businesses or religions, are the strong ones of the earth, and the protectors and pioneers of humanity. The systematic builder is a creator and preserver, while the man of disorder demolishes and destroys, and no limit can be set to the growth of a man's powers, the completeness of his character, the influence of his organization, or the extent of his business, if he but preserve intact the discipline of order, and have every detail in its place, keep every department to its special task, and tabulate and classify with such efficiency and perfection as to enable him at any moment to bring under examination or into requisition the remotest detail in connection with his special work. In system are contained these 4 ingredients: 1. Readiness. 2. Accuracy. 3. Utility. 4. Comprehensiveness. Readiness is aliveness. It is the spirit of alertness by which a situation is immediately grasped and dealt with. The observance of system fosters and develops the spirit. The successful general must have the power of readily meeting any new and unlooked-for move on the part of the enemy. So every businessman must have the readiness to deal with any unexpected development affecting his line of trade, and so also must the man of thought be able to deal with the details of any new problem which may arise. Dilatoriness is a vice that is fatal to prosperity, for it leads to incapability and stupidity. The men of ready hands, ready hearts, and ready brains, who know what they are doing, and do it methodically, skillfully, and with smooth yet consummate dispatch, are the men who need to think little of prosperity as an end, for it comes to them whether they seek it or not. Success runs after them, and knocks at their door, and they unconsciously command it by the superb excellence of their faculties and methods. Accuracy is of supreme importance in all commercial concerns and enterprises, but there can be no accuracy apart from system, and a system which is more or less imperfect will involve its originator in mistakes more or less disastrous until he improves it. Inaccuracy is one of the commonest failings because accuracy is closely allied to self-discipline, and self-discipline, along with that glad subjection to external discipline which it involves, is an indication of high moral culture to which the majority have not yet attained. If the inaccurate man will not willingly subject himself to the discipline of his employer or instructor, but thinks he knows better, his failing can never be remedied, and he will thereby bind himself down to an inferior position, if in the business world, or to imperfect knowledge, if in the world of thought. The prevalence of the vice of inaccuracy, and in view of its disastrous effects, it must be regarded as a vice, though perhaps one of the lesser vices, is patent to every observer in the way in which the majority of people relate a circumstance or repeat a simple statement of fact. It is nearly always made untrue by more or less marked inaccuracies. Few people, perhaps, not reckoning those who deliberately lie, have trained themselves to be accurate in what they say, or are so careful as to admit and state their liability to error. And from this common form of inaccuracy, many untruths and misunderstandings arise. More people take more pains to be accurate in what they do than in what they say, but even here inaccuracy is very common, rendering many inefficient and incompetent, and unfitting them for any strenuous and well-sustained endeavor. The man who habitually uses up a portion of his own or his employer's time in trying to correct his errors, or for the correction of whose mistakes another has to be employed, is not the man to maintain any position in the workaday world, much less to reach a place among the ranks of the prosperous. There never yet lived a man who did not make some mistakes on his way to his particular success, but he is the capable and right-minded man who perceives his mistakes and quickly remedies them, and who is glad when they are pointed out to him. It is habitual and persistent inaccuracy which is a vice, and he is the incapable and wrong-minded man who will not see or admit his mistakes, and who takes offense when they are pointed out to him. The progressive man learns by his own mistakes as well as by the mistakes of others. He is always ready to test good advice by practice, and aims at greater and greater accuracy in his methods, which means higher and higher perfection. For accuracy is perfection, and the measure of a man's accuracy will be the measure of his uniqueness and perfection. Utility or usefulness is the direct result of method in one's work. Labor arrives at fruitful and profitable ends when it is systematically pursued. If the gardener is to gather in the best produce, he must not only sow and plant, but he must sow and plant at the right time. And if any work is to be fruitful in results, it must be done seasonably, and the time for doing a thing must not be allowed to pass by. Utility considers the practical end and employs the best means to reach that end. It avoids side issues, dispenses with theories, and retains its hold only on those things which can be appropriated to good uses in the economy of life. Unpractical people burden their minds with useless and unverifiable theories, and court failure by entertaining speculations which, by their very nature, cannot be applied in practice. The man whose powers are shown in what he does, and not in mere talking and arguing, avoids metaphysical quibblings and quandaries, and applies himself to the accomplishment of some good and useful end. That which cannot be reduced to practice should not be allowed to hamper the mind. It should be thrown aside, abandoned, and ignored. A man recently told me that if his theory should be proved to have no useful end, he should still retain his hold upon it as a beautiful theory. If a man chooses to cling to so-called beautiful theories, which are proved to have no use in life and no substantial basis of reality, he must not be surprised if he fail in his worldly undertakings, for he is an unpractical man. When the powers of the mind are diverted from speculative theorizing to practical doing, whether in material or moral directions, skill, power, knowledge, and prosperity increase. A man's prosperity is measured by his usefulness to the community, and a man is useful in accordance with what he does, and not because of the theories which he entertains. The carpenter fashions a chair, the builder erects a house, the mechanic produces a machine, and the wise man molds a perfect character. Not the schematics, the theorists, and the conversationalists, but the workers, the makers, and the doers are the salt of the earth. Let a man turn away from the mirages of intellectual speculation and begin to do something, and to do it with all his might, and he will thereby gain a special knowledge, wield a special power, and reach his own unique position and prosperity among his fellows. Comprehensiveness is the quality of mind which enables a man to deal with a large number of related details, to grasp them in their entirety along with the single principle which governs them and binds them together. It is a masterly quality, giving organizing and governing power, and is developed by systematic attention to details. The successful merchant holds in his mind, as it were, all the details of his business, and regulates them by a system adapted to his particular form of trade. The inventor has in his mind all the details of his machine, along with their relation to a central mechanical principle, and so perfects his invention. The author of a great poem or story relates all his characters and incidents to a central plot, and so produces a composite and enduring literary work. Comprehensiveness is analytic and synthetic capacity, combined in the same individual. A capacious and well-ordered mind which holds within its silent depths an army of details in their proper arrangement and true working order is the mind that is near to genius, even if it has not already arrived. Every man cannot be a genius, nor does he need to be, but he can be gradually evolving his mental capacity by careful attention to system in his thoughts and business. And as his intellect deepens and broadens, his power will be intensified and his prosperity accentuated. Such then are the four corner pillars of the temple of prosperity, and of themselves they are sufficient permanently to sustain it without the addition of the remaining four. The man who perfects himself in energy, economy, integrity, and system will achieve an enduring success in the work of his life, no matter what the nature of that work may be. It is impossible for one to fail who is full of energy, who carefully economizes his time and money and virtuously husbands his vitality, who practices unswerving integrity, and who systematizes his work by first systematizing his mind. Such a man's efforts will be rightly directed, and that too with concentrated power, so that they will be effective and fruitful. In addition, he will reach a manliness and an independent dignity, which will unconsciously command respect and success, and will strengthen weaker ones by its very presence in their midst. Seest thou a man diligent in business? He shall stand before kings, he shall not stand before mean men, says a scripture of such a one. He will not beg, or whimper, or complain, or cynically blame others, but will be too strong and pure and upright a man to sink himself so low, and so, standing high in the nobility and integrity of his character, He will fill a high place in the world and in the estimation of men. His success will be certain, and his prosperity will endure. He will stand and not fall in the battle of life. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of the 8 Pillars of Prosperity by James Allen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The 5th Pillar, Sympathy. The remaining pillars are the 4 central pillars in the Temple of Prosperity. They give it greater strength and stability and add both to its beauty and utility. They contribute greatly to its attractiveness, for they belong to the highest moral sphere, and therefore to great beauty and nobility of character. They indeed make a man great, and place him among the comparatively few whose minds are rare, and that shine apart in sparkling purity and bright intelligence. Sympathy should not be confounded with that maudlin and superficial sentiment which, like a pretty flower without root, presently perishes and leaves behind neither seed nor fruit. To fall into hysterical weeping when parting with a friend, or on hearing of some suffering abroad, is not sympathy. Neither are bursts of violent indignation against the cruelties and injustices of others any indication of a sympathetic mind. If one is cruel at home, if he badgers his wife, or beats his children, or abuses his servants, or stabs his neighbors with shafts of bitter sarcasm, what hypocrisy is in his profession of love for suffering people who are outside the immediate range of his influence? What shallow sentiment informs his bursts of indignation against the injustices and hard-heartedness in the world around him? Says Emerson of such, "Go love thy infant, love thy woodchopper, be good-natured and modest, have that grace, and never varnish your hard, uncharitable ambition with this incredible tenderness, for black folk 1,000 miles off. Thy love afar is spite at home." The test of a man is in his immediate acts, and not in his ultra sentiments, and if those acts are consistently informed with selfishness and bitterness, if those at home hear his steps in dread and feel a joyful relief on his departure, how empty are his expressions of sympathy for the suffering or the downtrodden, how futile his membership of a philanthropic society. Though the well of sympathy may feed the spring of tears, that spring more often draws its supply from the dark pool of selfishness, for when selfishness is thwarted, it spends itself in tears. Sympathy is a deep, silent, inexpressible tenderness, which is shown in a consistently self-forgetful, gentle character. Sympathetic people are not gushing and spasmodic, but are permanently self-restrained, firm, quiet, unassuming, and gracious. Their undisturbed demeanor, where the suffering of others is concerned, is frequently mistaken for indifference by shallow minds, but the sympathetic and discerning eye recognizes, in their quiet strength and their swiftness to aid while others are weeping and wringing their hands, the deepest, soundest sympathy. Lack of sympathy is shown in cynicism, ill-natured sarcasm, bitter ridicule, taunting and mockery, and anger and condemnation, as well as in that morbid and false sentiment which is a theoretical and assumed sympathy having no basis in practice. Lack of sympathy arises in egotism. Sympathy arises in love. Egotism is involved in ignorance. Love is allied to knowledge. It is common with men to imagine themselves as separate from their fellows, with separate aims and interests, and to regard themselves as right and others wrong in their respective ways. Sympathy lifts a man above this separate and self-centered life and enables him to live in the hearts of his fellows and to think and feel with them. He puts himself in their place and becomes for the time being as they are, As Whitman, the hospital hero, expresses it, I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I myself become the wounded person. It is a kind of impertinence to question a suffering creature. Suffering calls for aid and tenderness and not for curiosity, and the sympathetic man or woman feels the suffering and ministers to its alleviation. Nor can sympathy boast, and wherever self-praise enters in, sympathy passes out. If one speaks of his many deeds of kindness and complains of the ill treatment he has received in return, he has not done kindly deeds, but has yet to reach that self-forgetful modesty which is the sweetness of sympathy. Sympathy, in its real and profound sense, is oneness with others in their strivings and sufferings, so that the man of sympathy is a composite being. He is, as it were, a number of men, and he views a thing from a number of different sides, and not from one side only, and that his own particular side. He sees with other men's eyes, hears with their ears, thinks with their minds, and feels with their hearts. He is thus able to understand men who are vastly different from himself. The meaning of their lives is revealed to him, and he is united to them in the spirit of goodwill. Said Balzac, "The poor fascinate me, their hunger is my hunger. I am with them in their homes. Their privations I suffer. I feel the beggar's rags upon my back. I, for the time being, become the poor and despised man." It reminds us of the saying of one greater than Balzac, that a deed done for a suffering little one was done for him. And so it is. Sympathy leads us to the hearts of all men, so that when we become spiritually united to them, and when they suffer, we feel the pain. When they are glad, we rejoice with them. When they are despised and persecuted, we spiritually descend with them into the depths, and take into our hearts their humiliation and distress. And he who has this binding, united spirit of sympathy can never be cynical and condemnatory, can never pass thoughtless and cruel judgments upon his fellows, because in his tenderness of heart he is ever with them in their pain. But to have reached this ripened sympathy, it must needs be that one has loved much, suffered much, and sounded the dark depths of sorrow. It springs from acquaintance with the profoundest experiences, so that a man has had conceit, thoughtlessness, and selfishness burnt out of his heart. No man can have true sympathy who has not been, in some measure at least, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. But the sorrow and grief must have passed, must have ripened into a fixed kindness and habitual calm. To have suffered so much in a certain direction that the suffering is finished and only its particular wisdom remains, enables one, wherever that suffering presents itself, to understand and deal with it by pure sympathy. And when one has been perfected by suffering in many directions, he becomes a center of rest and healing for the sorrowing and broken-hearted, who are afflicted with the afflictions which he has experienced and conquered. As a mother feels the anguish of her suffering child, so the man of sympathy feels the anguish of suffering men. Such is the highest and holiest sympathy, but a sympathy much less perfect is a great power for good in human life, and a measure of it is everywhere and every day needed. While rejoicing in the fact that in every walk of life there are truly sympathetic people, one also perceives that harshness, resentment, and cruelty are all too common. These hard qualities bring their own sufferings, and there are those who fail in their business or particular work entirely because of the harshness of their disposition. A man who is fiery and resentful, or who is hard, cold, and calculating, with the springs of sympathy dried up within him, even though he be otherwise an able man, will in the end scarcely avoid disaster in his affairs. His heated folly in the one case or cold cruelty in the other will gradually isolate him from his fellows and from those who are immediately related to him in his particular avocation, so that the elements of prosperity will be eliminated from his life, leaving him with a lonely failure and perhaps a hopeless despair. Even in ordinary business transactions, sympathy is an important factor, for people will always be attracted to those who are of a kindly and genial nature, preferring to deal with them rather than with those who are hard and forbidding. In all spheres where direct personal contact plays an important part, the sympathetic man with average ability will always take precedence of the man of greater ability but who is unsympathetic. If a man be a minister or a clergyman, a cruel laugh or an unkind sentence from him will seriously injure his reputation and influence, but particularly his influence. For even they who admire his good qualities will, through his unkindness, unconsciously have a lower regard for him in their personal esteem. If a businessman profess religion, people will expect to see the good influence of that religion on his business transactions. To profess to be a worshipper of the gentle Jesus on Sunday, and all the rest of the week be a hard, grasping worshipper of Mammon, will injure his trade and detract considerably from his prosperity. Sympathy is a universal spiritual language which all, even animals, instinctively understand and appreciate. For all beings and creatures are subject to suffering, and the sameness of painful experience leads to that unity of feeling which we all call sympathy. Selfishness impels men to protect themselves at the expense of others, but sympathy impels them to protect others by the sacrifice of self, and in this sacrifice of self there is no real and ultimate loss, for while the pleasures of selfishness are small and few, the blessings of sympathy are great and manifold. It may be asked, how can a businessman whose object is to develop his own trade practice self-sacrifice? Every man can practice self-sacrifice just where he is, and in the measure that he is capable of understanding it. If one contends that he cannot practice a virtue because of his circumstances, he will never practice it. For were his circumstances different, he would still have the same excuse. Diligence in business is not incompatible with self-sacrifice. For devotion to duty, even though that duty be trade, is not selfishness, but may be an unselfish devotion. I know a businessman who, when a competitor who had tried to cut him out in business cut himself out and failed, set that same competitor up in business again. Truly a beautiful act of self-sacrifice, and the man that did it is today one of the most successful and prosperous of businessmen. The most prosperous commercial traveler I have ever known was overflowing with exuberant kindness and geniality. He was as innocent of all tricks of trade as a newborn infant, but his great heart and manly uprightness won for him fast friends wherever he went. Men were glad to see him come into their office or shop or mill, and not alone for the good and bracing influence he brought with him, but also because his business was sound and trustworthy. This man was successful through sheer sympathy, but sympathy so pure and free from policy that he himself would probably have denied that his success could be attributed to it. Sympathy can never hinder success. It is selfishness that blights and destroys. As goodwill increases, man's prosperity will increase. All interests are mutual and stand or fall together. And as sympathy expands the heart, it extends the circle of influence, making blessings, both spiritual and material, more greatly to abound. Fourfold are the qualities which make up the great virtue of sympathy, namely 1. Kindness, 2. Generosity, 3. Gentleness, 4. Insight. Kindness, when fully developed, is not a passing impulse, but a permanent quality. An intermittent and unreliable impulse is not kindness, though it often goes under that name. There is no kindness in praise if it be followed by abuse. The love which seems to prompt the spontaneous kiss will be of little account if it be associated with a spontaneous spite. The gift which seemed so gracious will lose its value should the giver afterwards wish its value in return. To have one's feelings aroused to do a kind action towards another by some external stimulus pleasing to oneself, and shortly afterwards to be swayed to the other extreme towards the same person by an external event unpleasing to oneself, should be regarded as weakness of character. And it is also a selfish condition, for to do a kind action only towards one who pleases us, and when he pleases us, is to be thinking of oneself only. A true kindness is unchangeable and needs no external stimulus to force it into action. It is a well from which thirsty souls can always drink, and it never runs dry. Kindness, when it is a strong virtue, is bestowed not only on those who please us, but also upon those whose actions go contrary to our wish and will. And it is a constant and never-varying glow of genial warmth. There are some actions of which men repent. Such are all unkind actions. There are other actions of which men do not repent, and such are all kind actions. The day comes when men are sorry for the cruel things they said and did, but the day of gladness is always with them for the kindly things they have said and done. Unkindness mars a man's character, it mars his face as time goes on, and it mars that perfection of success which he would otherwise reach. Kindness beautifies the character, it beautifies the face with the growth of the years, and it enables a man to reach that perfection of success to which his intellectual abilities entitle him. A man's prosperity is mellowed and enriched by the kindliness of his disposition. Generosity goes with a large-hearted kindness. If kindness be the gentle sister, generosity is the strong brother. A free, open-handed, and magnanimous character is always attractive and influential. Stinginess and meanness always repel. They are dark, cramped, narrow, and cold. Kindness and generosity always attract. They are sunny, genial, open, and warm. That which repels makes for isolation and failure. That which attracts makes for union and success. Giving is as important a duty as getting, and he who gets all he can and refuses to give will at last be unable to get. For it is as much a spiritual law that we cannot get unless we give, as that we cannot give unless we get. Giving has always been taught as a great and important duty by all the religious teachers. This is because giving is one of the highways of personal growth and progress. It is a means by which we attain to greater and greater unselfishness, and by which we prevent the falling back into selfishness. It implies that we recognize our spiritual and social kinship with our fellow men, and are willing to part with a portion of that we have earned or possess for the good and well-being of others. The greedy man who, the more he gets, hungers for still more and refuses to loosen his grasp upon his accumulating store, like a wild beast with its prey, is retrogressing. He is shutting himself out from all the higher and joy-giving qualities and from free and life-giving communion with unselfish, happy human hearts. Dickens' Scrooge in A Christmas Carol represents the condition of such a man with graphic vividness and dramatic force. Our public men in England today, probably also in America, are nearly all, I think I might say all, for I have not yet met an exception, great givers. These men, Lord Mayors, magistrates, town and city councillors, and all men filling responsible public offices, being men who have been singularly successful in the management of their own private affairs, are considered the best men for the management of public affairs, and numerous noble institutions throughout the land are perpetual witnesses to the munificence of their gifts. Nor have I been able to find any substantial truth in the accusation so often hurled against such men by the envious and unsuccessful, that their riches are made unjustly. Without being perfect men, they are an honorable class of manly, vigorous, generous, and successful men who have acquired riches and honors by sheer industry, ability, and uprightness. Let a man beware of greed, of meanness, of envy, of jealousy, of suspicion, for these things, if harbored, will rob him of all that is best in life, aye, even all that is best in material things, as well as all that is best in character and happiness. Let him be liberal of heart and generous of hand, magnanimous and trusting, not only giving cheerfully and often of his substance, but allowing his friends and fellow men freedom of thought and action. Let him be thus, and honor, plenty, and prosperity will come knocking at his door for admittance as his friends and guests. Gentleness is akin to divinity. Perhaps no quality is so far removed from all that is coarse, brutal, and selfish as gentleness, so that when one is becoming gentle, he is becoming divine. It can only be acquired after much experience and through great self-discipline. It only becomes established in a man's heart when he has controlled and brought into subjection his animal passions. Its external signs are a low-pitched, clear voice, a distinct, firm, but quiet enunciation, and freedom from excitement, vehemence, or resentment in peculiarly aggravating circumstances. If there is one quality which above all others should distinguish the religious man, it is the quality of gentleness, for it is the hallmark of spiritual culture. The rudely aggressive man is an affront to cultivated minds and unselfish hearts. Our word gentleman has not altogether departed from its original meaning. It is still applied to one who is modest and self-restrained, and is considerate for the feelings and welfare of others. A gentle man, one whose good behavior is prompted by thoughtfulness and kindliness, is always loved, whatever may be his origin. Quarrelsome people make a display in their bickerings and recriminations of their ignorance and lack of culture. The man who has perfected himself in gentleness never quarrels. He never returns the hard word. He leaves it alone, or meets it with a gentle word which is far more powerful than wrath. Gentleness is webbed to wisdom, and the wise man has overcome all anger in himself, and so understands how to overcome it in others. The gentle man is saved from most of the disturbances and turmoils with which uncontrolled men afflict themselves. While they are wearing themselves out with wasteful and needless strain, he is quiet and composed, and such quietness and composure are strong to win in the battle of life. Insight is the gift of sympathy. The sympathetic mind is the profoundly perceiving mind. We understand by experience and not by argument. Before we can know a thing or being, our life must touch its or his life. Argument analyzes the outer skin, but sympathy reaches to the heart. The cynic sees the hat and coat and thinks he sees the man. The sympathetic seer sees the man and is not concerned with the hat and coat. In all kinds of hatred there is a separation by which each misjudges the other. In all kinds of love there is a mystic union by which each knows the other. Sympathy, being the purest form of love, sees to the heart of men and things. Shakespeare is the greatest poet because he has the largest heart. No other figure in all literature has shown such a profound knowledge of the human heart and of nature, both animate and inanimate. The personal Shakespeare is not to be found in his works. He is merged by sympathy into his characters. The wise man and the philosopher, the madman and the fool, the drunkard and the harlot, these he, for the time being, became. He stood where they stood. He entered into their particular experiences and knew them better than they knew themselves. Shakespeare has no partiality, no prejudice. His sympathy embraces all, from the lowest to the highest. Prejudice is the great barrier to sympathy and knowledge. It is impossible to understand those against whom one harbors a prejudice. We only see men and things as they are when we divest our minds of partial judgments. We become seers as we become sympathizers. Sympathy has knowledge for her companion. Inseparable are the feeling heart and the seeing eye. The man of pity is the man of prophecy. He whose heart beats in tune with all hearts, to him the contents of all hearts are revealed, nor are past and future any longer insoluble mysteries to the man of sympathy. His moral insight apprehends the perfect round of human life. Sympathetic insights lifts a man into the consciousness of freedom, gladness, and power. His spirit inhales joy as his lungs inhale air. There are no longer any fears of his fellow men, of competition, hard times, enemies, and the like. These groveling illusions have disappeared, and there has opened up before his awakened vision a realm of greatness and grandeur. End of Chapter 6.